Hello everybody, this is Alex, and in this video I'm going to be showing you three of the simplest calculators that I have built with Microsoft Excel and which have helped me quite a bit in the past in understanding my own strategy, forming my own style, and a bunch of other things throughout my trading career. So what I'm going to do is run through each of these three calculators with the first one here, the second one here, and the third one here. I'm going to give examples of how each one of these works. I'm going to show the math that's plugged in, the formulas that make these calculators work. And then once I'm done all that and you understand how these work, you're free to click the link in the description, which will bring you to the page where you can download this document and use it yourself. Now, as you can see on the right side of each calculator, I have written out the question that each of the calculators are trying to answer. So the first one we're going to look at is max share size. And as you can see with the question beside it, this calculator is trying to answer the question, how many shares can I buy in order to risk blank on this trade? Now, as is always the case with calculators that I build myself, a colored title means it's an input, and a black title, like here, means that it's an output. So what that means is that colored title is where you put in the information, and then the black title is what gets spat out by the formulas that are plugged in. So I'm going to run through an example, and I'll use numbers that hopefully most of us can relate to. We'll suppose that I'm willing to risk $50 on this trade. So I'm going to input 50 into the dollar risk amount, and then I'm going to put my entry and exit. So we can just use anything for this. Let's suppose we're trying to catch the break of a $2 level. So our entry is going to be 201, and let's just suppose we're risking approximately 10 cents with a stop level of $1.89. So what we're going to get as the outputs here are the risk per share, which is 12 cents, and then it's going to give us the max share size. So if this is my situation, this is the trade I'm considering, and this is the amount I want to risk, this 417 shares is the maximum I can take in order to only be risking $50. So now that we've done an example, we'll take a look at what's actually happening in this calculator. And it's very simple on this one. For risk per share, it's not too complicated. It's entry minus stop. That'll give you the risk per share. And then once again, it's pretty simple in the max share size, which is just taking your total dollar risk amount and then dividing it by the risk per share, which in this case gives us a result of 417 shares. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment and do another example with the changing the dollar risk amount, because that's what this calculator is all about. So let's suppose that we're looking at exactly the same setup, exactly the same entry, same stop, but we're going to change our risk amount. If we change it to $75, well then you can see that the only thing that changes is going to be the max share size, because the risk per share has not changed, but our risk tolerance has increased to $75, which is an increase of 50% over the previous example. And so our max share size is also going to increase by 50%. So next we're going to be looking at the dollar risk calculator, which is trying to answer the question, how much dollar risk does this setup carry? So this is a calculator where you put in the idea that you had. In this case, we'll use, let's say, 250 shares and, I don't know, an entry of 251 and once again, a pretty tight stop at 239. So in this example, we've been able to determine very quickly that my max loss on this trade, should I decide to take it, is going to be $30. That is, this setup carries a $30 risk in the way that it's written out now. Now, perhaps I can stomach a little bit more or a little bit less risk. If 30 bucks was too much for me, well, maybe I'd try 150 shares and see that that gives me an $18 risk. Maybe $30 is not enough, and I'd want to try 400 shares of the same setup, which would give me a total risk, or a max loss rather, of $48. So now let's take a look at the math that is controlling this calculator. And once again, in the risk per share, it's the same thing. It's just entry minus stop. And then for the max loss section, it is the inverse of the risk per share multiplied by the total shares in the position, which gives you the max loss. And last and probably least, we're going to look at the max stop calculator at the bottom. Now, this calculator is a little too specific for a wide use. It's meant for a situation where profit target is extremely clear, but stop loss areas are not particularly clear. So unlike the previous two calculators, which were both based on risk, this one is based on a profit target. And I'll get to why that's not super great later. But for now, let's run through an example. So let's suppose we were taking a 100 share position at an entry of 505, and our target, which was very clear for reasons on the chart or on the level 2 or whatever it may be in this particular case, we had a profit target of $5.95 just before the $6 level. So mainly what this calculator is doing is spitting out different stop options based on the risk reward ratios that you might be going for. So you can see here, if you're looking for a 2-to-1 risk reward ratio, your max stop has to be 460 on this trade. 1.5 to 1, it'll be 445, and 1 to 1, it'll be 415. I've also listed the target P&L, which is going to give you the total profit that you will make if you attain the target that is listed right here. So now we're going to look at the math that is controlling this max stop calculator, and it is definitely more complicated than the previous two were. So what I have open here is the formula for the 2-to-1 max stop calculator. I'll hit enter so you can see it's the one that's calculating 460. Now, instead of breaking down the actual formula, which just took me 2 minutes, I'm going to instead just state clearly that what each one of these max stop calculator levels are doing is just taking the distance between the entry and the target and then dividing it by the ratio that we want to achieve for our risk reward. And then once that's done, it takes that amount and removes it from the initial entry in order to produce the stop level. So as I cycle through these, you'll be able to see that the only thing that's changing is this number right here. The number 2 for the 2-to-1 ratio, and then 1.5 for the 1.5, etc., 1 for the 1. So now that we've learned how each one of these works, I want to talk about how and when you might use these. So I'm going to work my way up from the bottom because I believe the max stop calculator is something I really need to offer a warning about. The reason I said this is probably the least important of all of them is because it's only designed for a very specific situation. Now, I generally, and I think most people would, always recommend to base your trades on how much risk. You should always look at what risk makes sense first, and then see if the target lines up to make the risk make sense. This calculator is doing the opposite. It's focusing on the target and calculating the stop loss based on the target, and that is almost never the right approach. So I must caution that this is the max stop calculator is only designed for a very specific situation. Now, as for these two up here, the max shares and the dollar risk, you may have thought earlier, well, Alex, aren't these just the same thing? And you're pretty much right. They are two sides of the same coin. They are calculating basically the same thing, but they're showing you the different approaches. They are both effectively focused on the dollar risk amount. One of them is being really strict, which is the max share size. That's telling you exactly the share size you should go with. Whereas the dollar risk calculator leaves a little bit of room for leeway. So the dollar risk calculator is designed a little bit more for somebody with more freedom in their account, somebody with more equity available, more buying power, who doesn't really have to be very precise about what risk they're taking. For instance, if the difference between $60 and $50 risk is a big deal, well, then you'll generally want to use the max shares calculator. If you don't really care if you're risking $80 or $110 on a trade, well then dollar risk is probably more for you because you have the freedom to risk a little bit more or a little bit less. But yes, ultimately, these two calculators are somewhat redundant and you should not have to use both for the same trade. It should be either one or the other, and that will depend on a variety of factors that I can't really narrow down. It's going to be variables in your situation. Example, your hotkey setup will decide maybe which of these calculators that you're going to use. And there are a couple other things that I'm not going to bother getting into. So that's pretty much all I wanted to show you in this video, and I'm going to close by saying that I don't in practice actually have this document open. However, the only reason that I don't is because I can do all this in my head. Earlier on in my trading career, I did have this open a lot, and I would use it as a safety net. I would have an idea, and right before I executed the trade, I would plug all the trade metrics into my calculator just to make sure that I did all the math right. And after a long enough time, I just got apt enough that I could do it in my head. And that's what's going to happen to you too. But until you reach that level, I do strongly recommend to use these before your trade and after your trade. You can use this as a review tool to see if your trade was good after the fact. And I think this is really important. This is the kind of analysis that leads to success. And the reason it leads to success is because it helps you catch your mistakes. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check the description too, because I always do link related videos whenever they're published in anything that was published before. So as soon as I'm done, I am going to put a link in the description of this video of the other calculators that I have. For instance, this bad boy, which is far more complex and carries a lot more educational value, in my opinion. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching.